Since it is time, we will get started. We have a full and exciting day for you all. We're delighted to see you here. I'm Caroline Gooden with Project Scope, and I'm just going to get us started. Just a quick look to show you the sessions that are still coming up for the remainder of this series. Today, we are delighted to have Miriam Silman, who's going to talk to us about supporting families through a trauma-informed approach. I think you're going to love this session. Note that next week we do have a session. We're not waiting an alternate week, but we have a session next week on Tuesday. And we have Tia Petrenko speaking with us from Easter Seals Cardinal Hill. She is a speech language pathologist there, and she'll be talking with us about language development. So note that we go back to back with weeks this week and next. And then we'll go back to an alternate week schedule till the end of the series. It's going so fast. We want to thank our facilitators who are here with us today and who are guiding us in our breakout group discussions every week. We appreciate the great job that you're doing. They're all listed here.
Except one is missing because she became a grandma in the middle of the night. So Taylor's taking a bye this week, but congratulations to her.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, that's a good excuse. Very good. So roughly looking at how our schedule will go today is we'll do about 10 minutes of introductory information for you. And then we will have Miriam Silman introduce trauma-informed care, all different great information for you. She will then present for us a child challenge. We'll then have small group discussion for about 25 minutes from about 4:20 to 4:45. And then at 4:45, we'll bring you back for large group sharing of your discussion and wrap up. Just a couple of reminders for procedures for our call. We appreciate that you all keep your cameras on. And when you get into your breakout groups, that you have your sound on as well. Thank you for entering your name and your email in the chat for attendance. Also, if you are interested in networking with colleagues on areas of interest, please add that in the chat as well. We encourage you to take care of your needs during each of these sessions. We oftentimes talk about sensitive topics that may be difficult to hear and process. If you need to do whatever it is to take care of yourself, we encourage you to do that each week. We ask that you protect the confidentiality of all persons. We don't ever use real names here. Still, we don't discuss what happens in a scope meeting outside of a scope meeting with using any names. We encourage you to engage actively. Miriam will have chances for you to engage during her presentation, and then there will of course be active engagement during your breakout groups. You will find us using person-first language in all instances, talking about respecting the fact that we're all people first and have conditions second to that. Our session is recorded and closed captioned. Brandon, I think that we're recording. Looks like it is.
Right.
Thank you. Anytime you have questions while Miriam is speaking, please enter them in the chat and we will let her know your questions. Just a reminder that this is a judgment-free zone. We don't judge anybody's responses. We respect all viewpoints. We are all here to learn and to share. And if you have child challenges on any of the later topics for our session, please send them to us, including Tia's session on language. If you have a child challenge that's related, please send it to us as soon as possible. Brandon.
Yeah, so our resource page, if you haven't been there yet, make note of this link and go check that out. That is your one-stop shop for the slideshows from all of our sessions. The recordings are linked there, as well as CEU information, if that is something you are after. And as you probably have figured out, it is the same Zoom link for every one of our sessions. If you do run into any technical issues today or have questions, comments, concerns about any of the resources or things on that site that's linked there at the top, shoot me an email and let me know, and I'll be happy to assist you.
All right. So just to recap some of the conversation that we had last week, we do compile all of those conversations and resources. And those links to those resources are available on that page that Brandon shared. We know we email them to you, but just in case you get inundated with emails and you just kind of want one central spot where you can find all of those resources, they are on that particular site that he just referenced. So in thinking back to Lily, here is a compilation of some of the family and child strengths that were shared. And I don't want to read the slides to you, but so if you can just scan that real quick. And then we'll advance to the next slide. So here were some of the strategies that were suggested. So having parent-teacher conferences, talking with the different family members, whether it was the boyfriend or the grandparent. I know OTs and PTs were involved in Lily's life. So, just kind of touching base with the whole network of folks that are all surrounding and caring and loving on Lily and her family to see if anybody has any insights to what may be going on in this particular situation that might be a barrier for her getting to school and not being able to connect with the mom. And the next slide. Now, here are when I just encourage you, when you are talking and thinking of all of the great resources that are available either within your community or even statewide, if you're able to provide us some of the links, that's really, really helpful so that when any of you go to that kind of one-stop shop with all those resources, you would actually have the links. So if you're able to share links in your notes, that is ideal. But yes, these are some of our go-to agencies, community partners that can help support Lily's mom in this situation and the family in general. So we have, the Kentucky Moms, WIC, and Addiction Recovery Care. There's lots of sites statewide. Then Narcotics Anonymous, Alcoholics Anonymous. There's lots of resources available. And we'll go to the next slide. So here are some terms that we are going to be using today, and we just like to provide the definitions for you, just in case they are maybe newer to you. And, ACEs, for instance, is an acronym that, many people use, but we just kind of wanted you to have the full definition and a little bit of a description about what that refers to. And so here are just some terms that we wanted to share up front. All right. Well, today's session is really, really important. This is just like a fundamental belief that we all just really need to embrace if we are going to be able to reach and provide supports to the families that we're talking about serving in this situation. We are delighted to have Miriam Silman returning this year. And just to give you a little peek into her background, she has worked in the field of trauma and resilience as a clinician, a researcher, a trainer, and a program developer for more than 30 years. She is currently the Trauma-Informed Care Program Administrator for the Department of Public Health, Developmental and Intellectual Disabilities, and also the co-director of Kentucky Project Aware with KDE. So previously, she had worked with Mountain Comprehensive Care Centre, the UK Department of Psychiatry, the UK Centre on Trauma and Children Unite, and as an adjunct faculty at the UK College of Social Work. Miriam lived and worked in Eastern Kentucky for almost 30 years, where she worked to support community-based and nonprofit programs and activities in healthcare, behavioral health, social services, economic development, education, and the arts. In her spare time, she likes to read, hike, travel in non-pandemic times, and take in the arts. So it is a real pleasure to have Miriam with us again today. And I know that you will learn lots and be really inspired, and hopefully take away some nuggets to shift your everyday practice in the families that you serve. So I will turn it over to Miriam. We will
Thank
do
you,
the
Christine.
switcheroo
Yep.
of the PowerPoints.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here with you guys today. And as I said, I am working on my laptop. So I see Caroline. Caroline, are you seeing the slides?
We sure do.
Perfect. Okay. So we are going to talk about a way to do some trauma-informed, to trauma-inform your interactions with families with young children. Now, trauma-informed care and being trauma responsive and trauma-informed is a huge area. But one of the things that I feel really strongly about is that this is being trauma informed and trauma responsive and resilience oriented are things that we should be doing and we can be doing with every single aspect of and every single element of the work that we do. So it's not like you say, oh, I have to do that because it's trauma informed. The question really is, how can I trauma inform everything that I do? So when we thought about what are some nuggets that could help you do that with families for young children, this is what we came up with. And it may be a little bit of a different take from what you're used to when you think about being trauma informed in this way. So I hope it'll be some good food for thought. So we're going to talk about some 3 strategies. Oops, my slides keep advancing on their own. I definitely have gremlins in my laptop these days, just saying, so bear with me. But we'll talk about 3 key strategies. We will talk about the adverse childhood experiences study and revisit it from a place of hope and some of the work that has come very recently as a result of that. And then talk about some ways that you can think about making sure that when you're connecting families to services, that they are trauma-informed interventions and services. And as Caroline or Christine, I can't remember who pointed it out, we know that talking about this is sometimes difficult and uncomfortable and raises up some issues. And we talk a lot about self-care. And I really think that the key to us being able to sustain and doing this work is to be self-aware. And so when you are in a session like this or doing your work, self-awareness is really key. And so what we want to pay attention to is, what we need in this moment, how we need to take care of ourselves. And I certainly give you permission to not only pay attention to what you need, but to take care of yourself and to realize that sometimes things get triggered, as we say, get uncovered, that stay with us even after we're finished with the session or the work that we're doing. And so when we think about taking care of ourselves in that after time, when we're no longer working or sitting in that webinar, we want to think not only about making ourselves feel better in the moment, but also getting into the habit of using coping skills that really help us to metabolize and process what happened to us. So that means really thinking about what were we thinking, what were we feeling as a result of this encounter, this work, this learning opportunity that we had, and what do we need to do with those thoughts and those feelings? And usually the best way to metabolize and process is by giving words to them. We are a very language-based culture. For some people, they can have a really good experience of expressing what they're feeling and thinking through art or music or dance. A lot of us also need to use words or do better with words. And so that may help you to talk about what you're feeling or thinking with colleagues or friends or family or even a professional provider. And that's why that processing is helpful, is because it does help you to actually understand what you're thinking and feeling, what you need, give words and shape to it. So I just want to kind of elevate our thinking from this idea of self-care as relief to self-awareness as really metabolizing and coping and processing through the impact that exposure to traumatic material has on us. All right, Brandon, can we launch our first poll? There are 2 parts of this poll. So there are 2 questions. Whoops. Sorry about that again. We want you to first think about how much stress you're having today. With 1 is no stress and 10 is the most stress you have ever had or you can have. So just rate your stress level. You should see this on your screen. Should be able to rate that.
And Miriam, they might have to scroll down to get to the second part.
Yes. And then if you scroll down, the second part of this is to rate your level of management or coping with the stress. So 1 is you're not able to manage it at all. And 10 is you feel totally in control of it. So rate both things, please. I'm seeing some scores coming in. Thank you for participating. And this is a really nice exercise to use. And I think what's important about it is that when we are stressed, especially when we are stressed from things at work, sometimes there's no avoiding that. Life is stressful. And really, if we focus only on the stress, we can get frustrated because we can't do anything about it. But we can do something about how we respond to the stress. And that's the second part of the question. So I'm really gratified to see that folks are feeling like they're in pretty strong control of their stress today. We've got lots of 9s and 10s and upper numbers. And even though our stress is pretty well distributed through the middle, we have a pretty classic bell curve. So people are feeling some, there's some people feeling some significant stress, and we're kind of having an average, but you're definitely leaning towards the side of feeling like you are in good control of that. Oh, I just realized I didn't share the results. My apologies. There you go. So you should be able to see now this bell curve of, this is your stress level, this first part. So starting with 2s and up to 9s. And then this is how much control you feel like you have. So pretty good on the control. All right. Good thing to remember to not just ask people how well they are, how stressed they are, but how much control they have over it. All right. So let's talk about young children with young families. So Christine gave you a definition of trauma, and many of you are probably familiar with the 3 E's definition of trauma, which is one that I like to use from SAMHSA. This idea that trauma is an event that we experience, and then the experience of that event for us, which can be very individualized. And then it is also the effects. So it's a multifaceted concept. But I think it's really important to remember that trauma also accumulates and it builds on itself. And so that as we experience trauma in different parts of our life or at different times in our life, we have this layering effect. And so that the earlier traumas often are really significant in impacting how well we do with later trauma and how we adapt to it and address it and experience it and the effects that it has on us. So I want you to remember that when you're thinking about your families. And I want you to remember that while your focus may be on the children and some of the trauma that they may have been exposed to, that there's a very high possibility and probability that your parents or caregivers also have some layers of trauma. And that when you think about this family as a whole, it is very layered. And when you place that family then within its group identity or its culture, that there may be additional traumas that get layered in there. And all of that should be considered. And this comes from the work of Bonnie Burstow, and what was at that time considered a very radical understanding of how we looked at trauma by extending it in this way beyond just our immediate experiences, but also the idea that we can inherit some historical trauma and experience cultural trauma that happens to people who look like us or believe the same things as we have, even though it may not have happened to us directly, and how that impacts our families. Okay. So we're going to use as an organizing framework these 3 key strategies that come from this graphic that you see, or you were seeing before it moved, this graphic. And this comes from a wonderful place, which if you're not familiar with it, I urge you to go and explore their website, the Center for the Developing Child at Harvard. Fabulous videos and resources and ideas and brilliant thinkers there. And so the 3 key strategies that I want us to focus on is this idea of promoting and supporting responsive relationships, strengthening what we consider core life skills, and reducing sources of stress. And in that way, that's where our poll is going to come into handy, because we're going to talk about how we reduce the impact of those stress as well as the sources of those stress. So the first thing seems like a no-brainer. If you're working with children and families, then obviously you should pay attention to the relationships. We all have come of age professionally in a time where attachment has been a key component of how we understand child development, and particularly early childhood. And we understand this concept of serve and return in our child-adult relationships, that children, and particularly young children, benefit, and that healthy development of young children and young brains in particular benefit from the exchange that infants and young children have with the significant adults in their life. That not only does this promote healthy development, but it also helps those infants and young children to learn how to manage stress. So they actually learn in their interaction with the caregiving adults in their world how to handle stress. Because we know that stress happens even for young children. So what happens for children? Well, they get hungry or they need a diaper change and they can't meet those needs at that time. And so that is a stressful situation. And so they learn how to manage their stress until somebody comes and relieves it. And this is why we see that children who don't have attentive caregivers, children who experience neglect, can sometimes have really profound effects on not only their healthy development, but their ability to tolerate and manage stress. And so what we know from the positive is that the more healthy relationships a child has, the more not only healthy they will be in general, but the better able they are to recover from any trauma or adversity that comes in their life. And so this is a really important preventive and promotive intervention. And it seems simple, as I said, and it seems kind of like a no-brainer, but it's really, really important. In fact, it's key and it's critical. And there are many, many parents out there, as you probably know, who don't feel confident or comfortable in how they relate to their young children, or sometimes they don't really understand that the concept that children are children, and they see these kids as mini adults. And so they don't understand their role in that serve and return. It's not 50-50, right? As caregiving adults, we have to put much more and guide and direct this relationship much more. Now, we know that there is a parallel process to this in the way that we as professionals are relating to our adults, and especially the adult caregivers. And many times adult caregivers don't have good skills or even knowledge about how to build positive relationships because they never had that modeled for them. And so one of the things that we know is that creating a strong, positive, healthy relationship with the parents of young children can be a powerful change agent in helping them then create positive relationships with their children. And so we want to support them as much as possible. So there's this parallel process, which actually goes beyond, as they say in this quote, it comes full circle, so that we have a good relationship with the caregiver then creates a good relationship with the child, and they start to have that transactional exchange. And as we're having a transactional exchange with the caregiver, and then also with the parent. Now, one of the things that we know that gets in the way of these responsive and supportive relationships is that we are often stressed and we're responding to that stress. And we have this brain-body response to trauma and stress that causes us to go into an autonomic response of fight, flight, or freeze. And that's actually a very complicated response that happens, but very profound. And it's not something we necessarily choose. So it usually happens, and then we have to respond and figure out what to do with it. Well, for people who have experienced a lot of trauma, including caregivers, or for children who have experienced a lot of trauma, it takes a long time before they start to understand that their behavior is governed often by this fight, flight, or freeze response. And so one of the things that we want to try to remember is that we can't just intervene and tell people to stop it or to change or to do something different, because when you're in fight, flight, or freeze, you don't have the ability to do that at that time. And one of the things that we have learned about the brain part of this response is that it really interferes with our ability to use the executive functioning part of our brain, our frontal lobe. And I bring this up because I want to remind you that when you are working with families, caregivers, whether they are biological caregivers, kinship caregivers, foster caregivers, or you as caregivers, as childcare providers or teachers, et cetera, or in some other capacity, that when we are stressed, it also impairs our ability to be able to respond and to attend to the children in the best ways possible. So this is a diagram that shows you the difference between where our brain energy is going when we are stressed and we are not stressed. And on the left, you see that when we are regulated, when we are not feeling super stressed, or we are not experiencing trauma or a trauma reminder or trigger in any way, we are spending very little brain energy taking care of our basic needs, surviving, and even regulating our behavior and our emotions, because things are kind of going along, some maybe minor ups and downs, but it's kind of like a calm sea where the waves are coming in and going out, but it's in a rhythm and we can predict it and it feels comfortable. And if we wanted to wade in that water or we wanted to swim in that water, we could do so pretty comfortably. And even if a wave came along, we would see it coming and we could prepare for it. And we could think about what we wanted to do because we have the brain energy to actually focus on thinking. And we could think about how we wanted to relate to other people because we're not so busy having to survive. But as we become stressed, or we experience trauma and we have that traumatic stress reaction, the way that our energy is allocated looks much more like the triangle on the right, where we are spending much more energy and brain power on simply surviving. And for the developing brain, this means that there's less ability to develop those cognitive executive functioning areas and social and emotional areas and areas of regulation, which can lead then to patterns developing and neural pathways developing or not developing that cause what we see as challenging behaviors down the road during childhood, and then manifesting as difficult behaviors or behaviors that are self-harming, either directly or indirectly in adulthood. But we also know that this reaction is happening for the caregivers. And so when they are highly stressed, when their child is acting up or acting out, when they are feeling like they are not able to manage this situation, they are also not in a place where they can think carefully about how to navigate that wave that is coming. Maybe they don't even see the wave coming, or maybe the waves are coming so fast that they can't grab a breath. And so part of what we want to help them do is to get to a place where they can downregulate and calm enough that they can access the thinking part of their brain. And that in turn will help them be able to calm their child enough so that their child's development in those areas can start to happen on a normal trajectory. So I hope that that made some sense. I want to pause for a minute, see if anybody has any comments or thoughts or questions. I just shared this graphic with a group that had never seen it before, and they were physicians and healthcare providers and different people, and they were like, oh my God, that's a great graphic. So I forget sometimes how useful this is if you've never seen something like this. Just want to pause if you need to.
There's no comments in the chat. We welcome you to either unmute and ask a question or put a comment in the chat if you have it.
All right, so as providers, I want you to remember that when you are dealing with a stressed family, think about where they are in the continuum between the left and the right diagram, and how much you might need to do to help them calm to be able to access the thinking part of their brain. So I want you to take this poll and think about your practice and your engagement with folks who you work with, and there are 3 questions. So scroll down if you don't see them all. Have you ever worked with somebody in fight mode, in flight response mode, or in freeze response mode? Yes, no, or unsure. All right, so we're getting a lot of yeses. And I want to point out that flight mode could look like avoidance. It could look like disengagement. It could look like not showing up. Fight mode can look like anger. It can look like tension. It can look like being a smart aleck. It can look like being super controlling too sometimes. So can flight mode, because sometimes when we're afraid of what's happening, we have to try to control what we can. Freeze mode often looks like somebody doesn't care or isn't paying attention or is unable to make any change, to act on anything. So what's interesting about this is that so far, nobody has said, I think, Brandon, did you go ahead and share the results?
Yes, they should be sharing.
Perfect. Yeah, so you should be able to see it. So nobody has said no to any of these. So we know that this is happening. Sometimes when you're thinking about it, you're thinking, I don't know, was that fight, or was it freeze, or was it flight, or was it something kind of different? But for the majority of you think that you have. And so this is a very common issue that we really have to pay attention to. And that can get in the way of our ability to help our caregivers form relationships, or even of us forming relationships with those caregivers. So, it can hamper both sides of that process of relationship building.
Miriam, we've got a good comment on that one. It says flight mode can look like not showing up. That's really good to remember.
Yep, absolutely. So let's think about that for a minute. What are we asking people to do when we ask them to engage in our services? We're asking them to be vulnerable in some way. And if this is somebody who's experienced a lot of trauma, feeling vulnerable is the worst feeling in the world. And so sometimes you structure your life where you allow things to happen so you can avoid that vulnerability, right? And so I think we have to really, really pay attention to what might be happening behind. I would submit to you, not everybody agrees with me on this, but I would submit to you that if you drill down deep enough to all behavior, you're going to get to one of these 3. You may have to go through a lot of layers, but I would submit that most of the time, this is at the core of what drives all of us. Me too, you too. And, and that's why therapists stay in business, right? Because we're peeling back those layers to understand that a little bit. All right. So part of what we want to do is we want to help people to strengthen those core life skills and to promote their executive function. And so in order to do that, as I said, we have to help people self-regulate. We have to be able to help them manage when they become highly activated and they're not in thinking brain and they're in fight, flight, or freeze, to calm down enough to be able to make good decisions. And I will share with you that saying calm down is not very effective, as I'm sure you know. I learned this lesson very early on when I was a young therapist, in probably the early 90s. I had a client who at that time was about 11 or 12. He was a young man who had a lot of trauma, multiple hospitalizations, lots of behavior problems at school, at home, etc. And he said to me we had met a few times, so it was early on in our relationship, and he said, you people, meaning us adults and therapists and people like that, you people, you got to stop saying calm down. That's the worst thing you can say. And so I was smart enough in the moment to say, well, tell me more about that, instead of just say yes. And this is what he said. He said, if we could calm down, we would calm down. You think we like feeling like that? It doesn't feel good, but we don't know what else to do. And that was a very, very important lesson for a young therapist to learn. And clearly I've never forgotten it all these years later. And so the good news is that there are skills that we can teach people to help them self-regulate. And as we teach caregivers about self-regulation, they in turn can help teach children. And if you are working with children directly, then you absolutely want to be helping kids with their self-regulation. And you want to be taking every opportunity to show parents how you are helping the kids and teach the parents as well by helping them to see how you're teaching the kids and to learn from the learning with their children. And this is true not only of biological parents who may have had challenges in their life and may be dysregulated, but also for everybody else who's caring for children, right? So don't assume that just because somebody is a foster parent or a caregiver, that they know self-regulation, or they've been taught that, or that it works, and that they can access their executive function. So this is for everybody. Now, in order to promote self-regulation of children, one of the things that we have learned is that it requires co-regulation. And this is why we are always thinking about teaching the regulation to both the children and to the adults in their life. Because co-regulation is that interaction that happens between adults and the child to help the child learn, oh, I don't feel good now, but I don't have to stay feeling like this. This is what I can do with this feeling. So co-regulation is this idea that we are encircling the child, and maybe even sometimes that whole family as a caring adult to the family, and saying to them, we've got you. We know this feels bad right now, but we've got you. So I want you to reflect for a minute at a time in your life when you were super stressed and maybe didn't feel good. And when you think about what was helpful, very often what is helpful is the person who quietly sat with you or held your hand or put a hand on your back at a moment when you were feeling extremely vulnerable. Sometimes it's just having that other person there, that presence of a safe person who is essentially saying, verbally or non-verbally, I've got you. You're not alone. And we'll get through this together. That is helpful. And that, in essence, is what we are creating with co-regulation. Now, very often, parents and caregivers don't know how to do that. And so we have to teach them some skills. And so I would submit to you that as you teach self-regulation for the adults and for the youth, that we are going to work really hard at helping them understand that why this is so important, and that as they become more regulated, they're helping their child to learn to become more regulated. So we do this when we hold an infant close and we rock that child, right? And that we don't just put them down as soon as they stop crying, or we don't put them down if they don't stop crying. That part of co-regulation is saying, oh, you feel better now? That's great. I'm going to hang in there with you. I am here for you when you are feeling good, as well as when you are feeling stressed. It means that if it doesn't work and they continue to cry, that we try something else and we say, we're not going to give up on you, that we are here for you, even if you are uncomfortable. And even if you're stressing us out a little bit, we're going to stay on top of this, and we're going to be able to handle this. And as kids get older and they start to be toddlers and they fall and they get a boo-boo, and we comfort them. And even when we know that they don't need to be crying or teary anymore, or they could go back and play, we let them sit for an extra minute, or we keep them close, or we tell them that they can come back and check in with us in a few minutes. That's part of us letting them know that we are there for them. We've got them. We're not going to abandon them in their moment of need. And we're going to be there also for the good stuff, right? So it's really important that we extend that beyond just that moment of need in some way. This is really important to model for the adults, so that we need to celebrate the successes. We need to help adults. When adults call us and they reach out to us and they don't really have a problem, instead of saying, well, what did you call about? Or what do you need from me today? You know, I'm very busy. We need to remind her, if they come for pickup and they hang out a little bit longer, you need to see that as an affirmation that they want to build a bit of a relationship with you, that they are interested in connecting with you in some way, and to really seize that moment and let them know that you're not just there to criticize them or to correct them, but you're also there to just engage with them as another human being, to compliment them, and as much as you can to point out what they are doing well. And that will enable you to help them become more regulated. You're building that relationship, and then you can help them by co-regulating with them and help them co-regulate with the children in their life. And this process is critical for early childhood development. All right, our third strategy is this idea of reducing or buffering sources of stress. Now, we know that stress is inevitable in life. We know that some stress is actually kind of good. Normal stress, it motivates us. It makes us get our stuff together. It makes us meet a deadline. It makes sure that we pay the bills on time and get our taxes in and all of those kinds of good things. And then we know that there are things in our life that are tolerable, but we wish didn't happen. And in children's lives, those kinds of stressors, so in children's lives, normal stress could be like, you have to get in line, you have to wait your turn. No, you can't do that right now, et cetera. It builds a certain amount of character and persistence and grit and self-regulation. And tolerable stress for children would be things like losing something or somebody important in their life, and knowing that that's really hard and it makes them feel sad, and maybe really, really, really sad. And there are people who will help them through it, and they will get through it. Maybe it's a divorce. Maybe it's having to move and make new friends and start a new school, etc. What makes tolerable stress tolerable is that the people in the child's life, and this is true for adults as well, is that the people around us, the relationships that we have, help us to manage that stress, that they form a safety net, that they form that circle around us that says, we've got you, we're here for you. Now, toxic stress is when we don't have that circle, or it is the kind of stress that is so profound that even with that circle, it can't mitigate it. It can't make it be less harmful to us. And if we have constant toxic stress, that's when we start to see things like complex trauma and severe behavior problems. So we know that if we have chronic stress or toxic stress, that it starts to impact our brain development, that it puts our energy towards survival, not towards being able to develop those executive functioning and regulation parts of our brain, and really, really negatively and deleteriously impacts our brain development. So I want to share with you that many of you know about the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. Oh, goodness. And I want to share with you that, those first 10 areas that we assessed in the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study 25 years ago are represented on the leaves of the tree. And so we see a lot of things in that area that can be problematic, that you may see in the work that you do. Some of them are circled, but I would say incarcerated family member, maybe another one, divorce, etc., domestic violence, etc. Then when we look at the area of 2, the adverse community environments, then what we see there is we see lots of things that people don't have a lot of control over, but that can create a lot of stress, both for our caregivers and for our children. And then when we think about the third area, which is the area that has just been added to our understanding of ACEs, adverse climate and ecology, we see yet again that things that are way beyond our control can really have some additional layering impact of trauma on our families and on us, frankly. And if you'll notice, pandemic is listed on that adverse climate and ecology area. So we can see how as these things load and layer, they create more trauma, and it makes it hard for us to manage. So part of what we want to do is we want to look at what we can control, we can help people get access to resources for, and also ways that we can help people manage the stress that is created by these conditions through relationships and self-regulation in that way.
Miriam, we've got a question about the levels of stress. Can events that normally fall under tolerable stress turn into toxic stress if the people or relationships around a child are not secure and supportive?
Yes, exactly. That is a beautiful definition. Thank you. Okay. So I'm aware of the time, and I just want to end by giving you something positive. So we talk a lot about adversity in childhood, but what we have also learned is that there are positive childhood experiences, and those positive experiences can mitigate the impact of adversity on children. And we all need them. Now, I want you to think about the caregivers in your families. And as you look at these positive childhood experiences, as you have thought about what adversity maybe they've experienced, also think about what was missing from their childhoods in terms of positivity. And look at the family now and think about how can you influence these positive childhood experiences, build them up. This comes from the work of Christina Bethel at Johns Hopkins University. It is new work. She mimicked the retrospective study of the Adverse Childhood Experiences study and asked about positive experiences. And that's how she was able to distill down to these 7 areas of understanding. These seem to be critical things for children. So I want us to really think about how we in our roles can promote some of these positive childhood experiences for children and for families. And that by doing this, this is actually an intervention. This is not extra. This is not important. These are critical interventions of helping to build relationships, build self-regulation, mitigate stress by building these positive areas. So Segi and Harper Brown came up with these 4 key positive experiences: nurturing supportive relationships, check. Having safe, stable, protective, and equitable environments. So exactly what you just pointed out, that the absence of those can shift us from tolerable to toxic stress. Opportunities for social engagement and connectedness, not only within our families, but beyond, and think about how important it is that you are creating those opportunities. And then our learning, our ability to learn social and emotional competencies. And again, in order to be able to do that, that's about regulation and being able to turn on the cognitive functioning parts of our brain.
Miriam, we've got another good comment here. She says, love that you included hope. I have been spreading the idea of intentionally creating positive experiences for families and children.
Absolutely. And whoever said that, kudos to you, and spread the Kool-Aid. We are on a mission. So I also want to give you these indicators, and you hopefully can come back to this and look at this later. But these are 3 ways that you can see some and kind of start to pay attention to flourishing in children. So flourishing is related to hope, to this idea that when we have hope, that we see flourishing in adults and children. So this idea of interest and curiosity, right? That can actually be a measure, an indicator of something pretty important: persistence and the capacity to regulate emotions. So you can see how these lines of inquiry in the research are directly related to strategies that the 3 strategies that we talked about. So all of this is to say, oops, I went backwards. All of this is to say that this is super important to promote the positive. I want to just end by saying that I don't want you to make the assumption that everybody who works in the behavioral health world or the human services world is trauma informed. And when you are looking for trauma-focused interventions, or you want to make sure that a provider is going to be trauma-informed in the way that that can be helpful to your clients, please take a look at these questions and think about posing them to prospective agencies to ally with or providers to refer to. So our bottom line is that all interactions can and should be trauma-informed and resilience-oriented, that we should always pay attention to that relational dynamic, that we want to build the positive and the positive relationships and dynamics, even if there's adversity present, and that strengthening the adults in the family system is key to supporting the children. So with that, I'm going to stop my share for a minute. Sorry, I went a minute over, I think. Oh, I went 2 minutes over. My apologies.
And I'm going to share my screen, Miriam, so we can talk about the case that we have, the challenge Miriam will lead us through.
So we have